Now, hundreds of migrants have died and thousands rescued in the past week alone as warm weather and calm seas encouraged many to attempt the perilous journey across the Mediterranean Sea in search of a better life and safety in Europe. More than 700 migrants have drowned in the past 10 days between Libya and Italy. Now, survivors report abominable treatment at the hands of smugglers. Zlatica Hoke has more.
An Italian Navy vessel with hundreds of rescued migrants arrived in the southern Italian mainland port of Reggio Calabria on Sunday. The Vega also brought 45 bodies of people who perished during the journey across the Mediterranean. The survivors, most of them dressed in white suits, were met by emergency personnel as they disembarked the ship.
We were able to provide medical care to the migrants on board, thanks to the doctors the Navy makes available to us. And we also provided clothing to the migrants, particularly to those who had lost theirs in the shipwreck. We also provided hot meals.
The United Nations commended Italy for the extraordinary effort to save lives.
The Italian Navy has been doing a fantastic job. They have rescued about 14,000 people so far this week. But unfortunately, there have been a number of incidents where people have lost their lives. And in 3 separate shipwrecks, we estimate that 700 people might have died or are still missing.
Officials say most of the people on board the shipwrecked vessels were from sub-Saharan Africa. Survivors say the smugglers who ran the boats made no attempts to save passengers from drowning.
It seems that on Wednesday night, at least 2 fishing boats and a rubber boat left the Libyan coast. One of the fishing boats carried around 500 people, and it towed the smaller fishing boat with some 400 people on board. On Thursday morning, the smaller boat, the one that did not have a motor and was being towed, started to take on water. Some people managed to jump in the water and reach the larger boat, and some were even able to climb up the tow line. Very few people. The tow line was then cut and the smaller boat sank.
Italian authorities have arrested 4 suspected smugglers, including a Sudanese man who commanded the towing boat and allegedly ordered passengers to cut the tow line linked to the sinking boat. According to the UN Refugee Agency, about 200,000 people have crossed the Mediterranean so far this year. And before this latest tragedy, about 1,700 had been reported dead or missing. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Now, for more on the migrant crisis, journalist Josephine McKenna joins me live via Skype from Rome. Now, Josephine, we know that this is a massive operation there of rescue and, of course, recovery of the bodies. What can you report? What's happening right now?
Well, Vincent, as you can imagine, when those bodies disappear, it becomes incredibly difficult for the Italian Navy, the Coast Guard and other vessels to try and find them. And as you said, around 14,000 people were rescued last week. We think, based on what UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is saying, around 700, perhaps more, lost their lives. And to actually try and recover those bodies, I think, is a tall order, even though some have been recovered at the scene during the rescue operations. So it is a very difficult situation for the authorities to try and find those missing bodies.
And now we know as the weather gets better, it gets worse. Where are the Italian authorities taking these thousands of people arriving on the shores of Italy?
Well, it's a huge wave, as you can tell, that's just arrived in the last week, and the migrant centres here in Italy are really feeling the strain. There was a bit of a riot at one of the centres in Palermo today where migrants barricaded themselves in. They said they weren't getting enough food and enough medical care. Up in the north of Italy, one of these makeshift migrant tent camps on the border of France was cleared out by authorities, and those migrants, around 100 migrants, were taken in by the local Catholic Church there. So there is a bit of a reaction going on. Some politicians are calling this an invasion, which is quite an emotional term, and some communities don't want more migrants. We saw an interesting poll come out today. Around 1/3 of Italians interviewed in this survey said that they think the migrants should be sent back. So there's some very strong political views across the spectrum right now in Italy, even though the Italian Navy and the Coast Guard are doing a great job rescuing these people who are so desperate.
Now, very quickly, we know that, this is almost kind of what was expected to happen at this time. How are the authorities there preparing themselves? I mean, it is something that is happening, was expected.
Well, it is a major operation. It is expected at this time of year when the weather conditions become more acceptable for making this voyage, even though these voyages are incredibly dangerous. There's a major coordination effort underway between the Italian Navy, the Italian Coast Guard, the European Union vessels, and other NGOs like SOS and Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, who all send boats to this area. And one of my friends was on an SOS boat last week where they winched to safety a tiny baby up into a helicopter who needed desperate medical care. And that gives you some indication of just the lengths that these Italian Navy and Coast Guard officials are going to try and save lives and give these people a fresh start in Europe.
Indeed, a dire situation. Josephine, thank you very much for your report.
Thanks, Vincent.
Josephine McKenna reporting live via Skype from Rome.